So, hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of Schooled In. My name is John Lunn, aka Jonnychipz, and in this video series, we take a deeper dive into some of the awesome cloud technology that we all know and love. I'll be joined by another fantastic person from across the tech community in this episode, who's kindly taken their time out of their day to come and school me in a particular tech topic. Okay, so whether you're watching this on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, or LinkedIn, thanks so much for tuning in. It really is appreciated. Please do take part in the chat, drop us a comment, a like, and a subscribe. That'd be really appreciated. Okay, so security today should be a focus topic of conversation for any organization. None more so than in today's world, with security exploits, phishing attempts, breaches, and ransomware attacks becoming, unfortunately, all the more prevalent across businesses worldwide. Defense in depth strategies have been around since the dawn of time, and today we're going to take a peek at one of the areas of that, application security. So I'm super thrilled to be joined by a Senior Workspace Solutions Architect, Microsoft MVP, and founding member of the amazing cloud management community, Mr. Dean Ellerby, who today is going to school me in Windows Defender application control. How's it going, Dean? Thanks for joining me.
Very good. Thanks, John. How are you?
I'm all right. You've gone into slow-mo again, Dean. I think your internet is giving us a bit of grief, but we'll work through that,
Dear. Oh, dear.
Or is that just how you're feeling today? I don't know. You tell me.
A little bit tired, Yeah, the internet doesn't seem to be playing ball, does it? How are we?
Yeah, we're all right. We'll get through it. So anyway, I mean, for the purposes of this video, Dean, I know we know who you are. Well, me. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit more for our audience?
Yeah, certainly. I'm fairly certain I know who I am now. I've been introducing myself for a little while now. I'm Dean Ellerby. Thanks for the introduction earlier on. You got all the job titles and stuff right, so thanks for that. I'm an Enterprise Ability MVP and Certified Trainer. You missed that. I'm an MCT.
I did. You are an MCT
which
as
is
well, yes.
Perfect for this episode, surely, because school, Yeah. I've been working with endpoint and identity security for, well, at least 13 years. I've really focused more on the security piece in the latter half of that, really. But yeah, in IT for at least 13 years. As you mentioned, I run a YouTube channel with the cloud management community team, and that focuses on cloud management and security, and it's where I post most of the free content that I deliver, because it's just a fantastic place to put training and demo content, really, I find.
Yeah, you're doing a fantastic job at that. So yeah, I think this is just an extension to it, whereas you're coming on to tell me about something in an area that, look, I don't get involved with on a day-to-day basis more often than not. So really excited about this episode, Dean. So, I mean, without further ado, shall we jump on over and you can give us a little bit of background as to what we're going to go through today?
Yeah, certainly. I've got a few slides, probably more than a few. And I don't want to really make this too slide heavy, but I think a lot of the content that I want to talk about can be illustrated by a picture, So I've got a few slides, and we'll talk about just the fundamentals first, I think.
Cool.
Oh, yeah, there they are. The slides are on. Fantastic.
They are.
Fine. So that logo, by the way, is the Cloud Management Community logo. I have a Windows Defender App Control video on the channel as well that we'll link to in the description, hopefully. But let's jump in. So what is WDAC? And the first section of this will cover the fundamentals, and I really want to talk about what is Defender App Control, what problems does it solve, how is it implemented, and what it looks like to an end user. And then finally, we'll look at a comparison of WDAC to AppLocker. You might have heard of AppLocker, but that's pretty much what we're going to cover first. Then, if we get time, I want to look at levels of enforcement, what can run when you deploy a Windows Defender App Control policy, and then we'll talk about this a bit more, managed installers. I'll go through some of these shortly, but there's a concept of multiple policy modes: lightly managed, fully managed. You can deploy it through config manager, group policy, Intune. So I want to cover all of that.
Okay.
Out of interest, have you any experience in config manager or Intune deployment of anything?
Yeah, minimal. I think it's probably fair to say, like you, Dean, you know, I've been in the industry a fair amount of years, so I've kind of come across most technologies and dabbled with them and play with them. So, I mean, my understanding at a very broad, high level is that Windows Defender application control is it about trying to control the applications that are running on a particular endpoint? You know, are we talking Windows 10? Are we talking iOS, Android? Are we talking, you know, the entirety of the OS suite that is supported by the likes of Intune, or am I missing something?
Yeah, well, it's the clue's in the name. It's Windows Defender App Control,
Okay.
and it is just Windows, but it is essentially an allow listing solution for applications. But it goes deeper than that a little bit. App Locker, the thing I talked about earlier on, we'll go into it in much more depth shortly and do a comparison. But App Locker was the original thing that came in Windows Vista, I think, which or might have been 7, which tried to do application allow listing to, you know, protect against ransomware and applications being launched on devices that you didn't want them to be launched on. But we'll go into it in much more depth. I've got a couple of slides that talk about what it is really. So
Yeah, cool.
Fundamentals of Defender App Control then. So it is as close as you're going to get to zero trust for apps. So it's a crucial line of defense for protecting enterprises given today's threat landscape, as you mentioned in the introduction, and it's an inherent advantage over traditional antivirus solutions. Specifically, application control moves away from an application trust model where apps are assumed to be trustworthy because they're installed by an administrator. They instead need to earn that trust in order to be able to run. They need to earn that trust at every launch. So Windows 10 and Windows 11 include 2 technologies that can be used for this, and they are Windows Defender App Control, which is what we're talking about today, and App Locker. So what problems does App Locker, what problems do these solve essentially? So what problems does WDAC solve? Yep. Let's say, for example, a vulnerability is discovered in Windows today, like right this second it's broadcast to the world via Twitter. Let's take printers, for example. Let's assume there's a way that an attacker could run scripts, code, malware, or whatever on the most important servers in your organization, like a domain controller. And due to the vulnerability that's been broadcast, they can run that code as the most privileged user in the organization, so system on that device. And they can do that just by compromising any regular user's laptop. You probably know that scenario. That was Print Nightmare that I essentially went through there. And that happened in July 2021. And in July 21, a GitHub repo was published publicly, which described how to use the print spooler service to run code as system within a server through standard user permissions through the vulnerability that was disclosed. There isn't any information as to why that went public, but we sort of know that it wasn't meant to go public.
Yeah.
So let's say, for example, we could deploy a single policy to your servers or your computers, and in that policy say only run scripts, code, binary, or apps that are signed by Microsoft or that are a core part of the Windows OS. For a domain controller, that should be fairly easy, right? Because it doesn't run much. It'll run Microsoft stuff that's made by Microsoft and signed by Microsoft or is a core part of the Windows OS. And you don't want that many third-party things, and you don't want to change the things on your domain controller too often. So that should be fairly easy, right? You might need a third-party security agent, but it's not going to change too often. If you did that, if you had that policy running on these machines, that would stop ransomware, really. That would stop ransomware being able to do anything on these devices unless they'd found a way around Windows Defender Application Control, which we'll talk about shortly. That would at least stop it in its tracks. It would at least make the person running that vulnerability or trying to execute the vulnerability, stop and think, I haven't been able to do that. I'll need to figure out a way around this mitigation that's been put in place. So it would stop it in its tracks, and it would probably make it sufficiently inconvenient for an attacker to just stop attacking you and move on to somewhere more, some organization that's easier. It might also give you time to detect their presence and close the door in some way, or firewall them out. But either way, it buys you valuable time to fix the problem.
Yeah.
So if you consider that the entry point for malware is unlikely to be an actual server, and it's unlikely to be the domain controller at the start, because administrators and users don't normally browse stuff on servers. They shouldn't browse stuff on servers. It's more likely to be a standard user machine or a terminal used by an admin. So we start there. We apply the application control policy to prevent unauthorized apps running on a workstation. It's fairly simple. As I mentioned at the start, there are 4 main ways to deploy app control. That's config manager, Intune, GPO, and a script. And I'm going to go into those in more detail shortly.
Okay. So this is the behind the scenes, that blue box that pops up on the screen, is it? This is effectively what's going. Yeah. Okay.
This is what the user would see.
So I suppose then, before you go on, like you just described there, just for my own kind of summing up in my head, that when we've got these things that potentially servers, member servers, domain controllers, whatever it may be, that potentially could be compromised by, user accounts, exploits can be exploited to run scripts across whatever it may be that the exploit you can target with it. This solution, Windows Defender App Control, is targeted at Windows-only devices to be able to put and turn on the ability to only allow certain executables to run on that particular operating system. That inherently should reduce the ability, if not limit it completely, to run anything on remote systems and things like that. Is that what we're talking around?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. I mean, it's not just the remote systems, though. It's if someone was physically present trying to run something, which is what you see there. That's it says your organization's used WDAC to block this app, and that user in this example was trying to run Chrome setup to install Chrome. With you. And the point there, that's not an ideal thing for a user to see, but they were doing the wrong thing. If they need Chrome, they ask an admin for Chrome, and they install Chrome the right way, not by using Chrome setup, because 1, it's not ideal for Chrome to be randomly spread across the organization with different versions, but 2, we don't know where that Chrome setup came from. Is it definitely reputable? Is it definitely signed by Google, and all that kind of stuff that we just don't know because the users grabbed it themselves.
Yeah.
So for the most part then, if it's implemented correctly, it should be transparent to the user, and they'll be able to launch and run all the applications that they want to throughout their day, throughout their job. But if they try to run something like Chrome setup, that is code or scripts or binaries that are just not approved, and by approved I mean in the allow list, then they'll see that message that's been blocked, and then there's not a lot more they can do with that information other than just ask their admin to unblock it. Unlike AppLocker, which we'll talk about in a moment, WDAC applies to the device and not the user. So that means that you apply it once to the device, and every user on that device, including admins, will have this experience. So if we get time, I'll talk about how we can allow admins to override or overcome that block if they need to in a certain situation.
Okay, cool.
The next thing I want to talk about is just the difference between AppLocker and WDAC, because they are important to understand. And AppLocker is available on Windows 10. You could enable it through policy right now, or deploy it via config manager or Intune or a script. Same with WDAC. So which should you choose? Well, WDAC isn't a replacement for AppLocker. In fact, you can and possibly should use it alongside them in parallel. You perhaps might need to do that in your organization. That concept that I gave of admins being blocked with WDAC, you might want to use app locker, which can be applied at the user level to apply more strict policy to users. But if we just take the comparison for now, so you choose which is the most appropriate technology, and hopefully throughout this you'll get to learn which one is the most appropriate. But if you're trying to decide, then app locker might be best if you have, for example, Windows 7 machines and need to apply the same policy across all of your organization. Then you need to use app locker because WDAC doesn't apply to Windows 7. If you need to apply policy to different users, again, app locker supports that, WDAC doesn't, and for good reason. It's not that it's not good enough, and it's not that it's a feature they missed out. It shouldn't apply to different users because it's meant to apply to the device.
Yeah, okay, with you.
Or if you don't want to I've lost my train of thought, but we'll come back to that. So it's about manageability versus security again. So app locker allows any admin to remove or override the policy, which is important because that's the first thing malware would do, or an attacker would look to do. Whereas WDAC can be made to never allow that. So it's not by default that. But it is possible that you can actually lock it down so that an admin can't even override it.
So I'm sensing some kind of like a matrix list of things, features and compatibilities and things. Is there such a thing between, I mean, Microsoft are great at producing lots of different features and functionalities, but there always seems to be this overlap, doesn't there? And I guess this is one of those areas, is it, Dean, where you've got the likes of WDAC and app locker, that one is targeted more towards device, one is more targeted towards the user. You can use both in parallel. Which one wins out? I suppose you've got all of those kind of nuances then to think about, right, which policy will apply in which certain circumstances. Is that what we're going to get into in a second, is it?
It's not. This is my only slide on WDAC versus app locker, because the advice is you should use WDAC. That's right. The broad advice from Microsoft and from the majority of the security community that I've witnessed and spoken to. Use WDAC if you can. If you can't, for whatever reason, then you can fall back on app locker. And if there's certain specific edge cases that need to be served by something like app locker, then you can also use app locker. But broadly, if you can use WDAC, use WDAC.
So, I mean, the app locker, one of the potential advantages is that it gives you that workaround for admins to kind of break out of being blocked for a particular application, does it? Whereas WDAC doesn't.
Well, yeah. So admins, if you don't target the admin with the policy, then they'll be able to run anything they want on the device. When I say admins, I mean a specific user, like an actual identity owned by the admin, rather than a user with local admin.
With you. So this is just because you're not targeting the admins. It's not that there's a special key or there's a special way to, I've just got this message, I need to run this executable. It's not that at all. It's just the fact that you haven't targeted that particular admin account with an app locker policy.
Yes.
Right.
But also, as the admin of the device, you could just remove the policy anyway. If you needed to do a certain thing, then you could just remove the policy itself. So that it's inherently less good. But if you can't do WDAC, at least do some form of app locker if you can, because anything is better than nothing when it comes to preventing these harmful apps or ransomware or malware.
Yeah, cool, understood.
So the next thing I want to talk about briefly is WDAC versus device guard, and that is because, as you can see, it says WDAC plus HVCI, hypervisor code integrity, is what device guard is. So let's talk about that briefly. So when Microsoft originally promoted device guard, when they originally advertised it and said, this is a new cool thing, you should do this, they did it with a specific concept in mind, and that was that they wanted to use WDAC to protect applications and prevent applications from being run and leverage hypervisor code integrity to make that really secure. So they would essentially, they sold the idea of it being a fully secure lockdown solution when leveraging these two things in combination. But because HVCI needs virtualization-based security, it's got hardware, firmware, kernel driver compatibility requirements that some old platforms and some systems don't support. A lot of organizations looked at the requirements for Device Guard and said, "Oh, actually, I can't do that. We can't use WDAC," and that wasn't true. So they essentially Microsoft misled many organizations through their marketing to think that WDAC needed HVCI and it was called Device Guard, when that's not true. They could have enabled WDAC without HVCI and it would have been at least better than nothing.
So is that HVCI, that bit around like the trusted platform module and things like that, the hardware requirements on a device that, like you say, goes along with it to kind of make sure that you're running appropriate code or hardware specific things on that device and you've not got something plugged in or a chipset has been replaced by a malicious attacker? That's what the HVCI bit was doing, was it?
It's the HV bit that's most important. So it's the hypervisor. It uses it. The device needed to be able to support the virtual element of that. So it virtualized a lot of the protections around WDAC. So you can still enable HVCI. You can still use what used to be known as Device Guard and still kind of is. But what they've done is they've branched them off. So now you have WDAC as its own separate thing that Microsoft is promoting for obvious reasons, with all of the ridiculous malware and stuff that's come out over the past couple of years. If WDAC was broadly adopted across most organizations, that might have been a different story. Print Nightmare might not have been such a big, widespread issue. All of these takeovers and ransomware stuff we hear about might not have been such a big issue because there would have been at least a base level of protection in place.
With you. Yeah, okay.
So we have essentially covered the stuff that I wanted to talk about there. I want to talk about how you can understand what can run on a device when you deploy a policy, and that kind of depends how you deploy the policy. I talked about config manager, Intune, GPO, and script, and this is a wall of text that I'm going to show you next, but I want to just flick through them briefly to show you what the differences are between these different application methods. So firstly, config manager. Again, apologies for the wall of text, but it looks broadly the same as Intune. And in fact, the only difference between the two is that with config manager, the configuration manager client is automatically allowed for obvious reasons. That's going to be needed for managing the device. And by default, all software deployed through config manager that is installed after WDAC is pushed to the device is trusted. And that's really important. And that comes back to the managed installer concept, where if something like config manager installs all your applications, then you don't need to worry about whitelisting and allow listing every single one. You can just trust that config manager will allow it to run.
Okay.
Similarly with Intune, except it hasn't got an agent, it just works. And then you've also got this concept here, excuse me, this concept here of software with good reputation as determined by the Microsoft Intelligent Security Graph. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about what the ISG is.
So is that not a hole there though, Dean? If we're trusting SCCM to deploy applications, would a hacker not target potentially a config manager server and add their own package to deploy to all devices? Is that not a potential issue?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean that's one route in, and this is never meant to be foolproof. It's never meant to be unattackable. It's just the level of complexity an attacker would need to go to compromise a config manager environment and then deploy is greater than just running the application itself straight on the endpoint. You know, so
No,
it's an
absolutely.
extra step.
And I guess I was just poking that bear to see if you turn around and go, yes, actually, the way then to kind of cover that gap is with this, you know, and I suppose that's the point. Like we said at the start, it's all about defense in depth, isn't it? So, understood.
Well, and a lot of organizations won't just use the config manager implementation as you're seeing it here, and they'll deploy it in a slightly different way that we're gonna look at hopefully in the next bit. But yeah, you're right. It is a way of attacking. So you should secure those environments.
I mean, I guess
correctly.
is that a like an on and off, an enable or disable thing with if you deploy an apps through config manager, or is it an always on thing that if you deploy WDAC and the application's deployed with the config manager agent, they're inherently just trusted? You know, or is it a switch that we can switch to say?
So it's applied at the policy level when the policy gets applied, and as I said, if you use the native config manager deployments, then these are the things that are trusted. The only optional thing there is the ISG. You don't have to trust trusted apps by the ISG when you deploy the config manager. Similarly, the only optional thing there in Intune is the ISG. The rest of it just happens. That's all the control you've got. When we look at the more customizable approach, so GPO and Intune, you can see the rest of the options there are fully optional. So you can allow drivers, you can allow Windows Store apps, you can allow a managed installer, and you can also allow the ISG, but you don't have to. It's not fixed. So it's much more flexible to deploy via script than it is via config manager and Intune, but it's much easier to deploy via config manager and Intune.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So, how are we doing for time?
We're about 27 minutes in.
Oh, so I've got a lot left. Not long left, have I?
Well, as you are.
So, managed installers. Essentially, it was introduced in Windows 10 17.03, and it, as we've just talked about, it allows you to deploy a nice, easy policy that will work if every application is deployed via config manager or Intune. Then you don't need to worry about allowing them. But as you've pointed out, that's not exactly perfect, and there is security considerations. For example, it's not an explicit allow or deny. For example, it's just everything deployed by the managed installer. The possibility that a user with admin privileges or malware running as the administrator might be able to circumvent WDAC if they're using a managed installer, as in the exact way you just described. It's best suited when no one has admin on machines, if you've just got a standard user environment. Sure. And also, you need to be aware when you're installing applications, sometimes these applications will automatically launch after they've installed themselves. And say, for example, 7-zip automatically launched after you'd installed it by the managed installer, then every file that was created by 7-zip would be trusted as if it was. So there's a lot of considerations around that, but that's pretty much that. And then there's obviously some limitations. Apps that self-update aren't supported. So these apps, when they're installed, are tagged as being trusted by the managed by WDAC, and if they update themselves, those files change and suddenly they're not trusted anymore. So that can break. MSI X packages aren't supported.
Is it just like they do a hash, do they, or something of the app when it's installed at a particular version, and that's the thing that probably manages the app, is it'll recognizes that the app is running or not?
It adds an attribute to it to say it's trusted, and it writes it as the file is being delivered to the disk. So so that's how it identifies the files, and then obviously if that changes, if the file physically changes, then it hasn't got that attribute anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
Good. So, I mean, that there is one more thing that I want to touch on, and I think it would be good to get into a demo at some point, but I doubt we'll get into it in this session, to be honest. It is a much bigger topic than.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's good just understanding. Look, there is this thing called Windows Defender Application Control, and this is how, how you can deploy it. I mean, yeah, I mean, look, see how far we get now. How much more slideware have you got, Dean, to go through now?
I want to touch on two topics, and then we'll jump into a demo. I just want to give you this concept of multiple policies, because since Windows 10 1903, you can have multiple policies deployed simultaneously, up to 32 per device. And that has the benefit of allowing you to deploy, there's the concept of base and supplemental. If you have a base plus a base policy, two base policies, then essentially they're run as a intersection. So in order to run, an application must be in both base policies. Yeah.
Okay.
Whereas if you run a base plus supplemental, that's a union, and so the application can be in either the base or the supplemental in order to run. And that is incredibly powerful when it comes to maintaining these policies, because you can deploy a broad base policy that says nothing's allowed to run, and then deploy a supplemental policy for each change that you need to make. If you bring in a new set of applications that you need to support, then you can deploy up to 32 supplemental policies that will extend your existing deployment. It's important to note, though, that Config Manager and Intune native deployments don't support multiple policies. They only support single policy mode, which is why they are much more constrained in their capability that I discussed earlier on.
Right.
It's much more simplified because it's actually using the App Locker CSP to deliver single policy mode, which is why it's much more restricted and constrained. Whereas multiple policies since 1903, fantastically scalable, fantastically configurable, and using what's called the Application Control CSP, which is developed specifically for WDAC.
Okay.
So second last slide. You can have something lightly managed. So, for example, company owned, but users are free to install software, and devices required to run the organizations. That would be a light management. You would essentially allow users to install whatever they want, and just prevent things that aren't trusted by the ISG. I skipped over the slide about the ISG. The ISG is essentially like Smart Screen. Have you heard of Smart Screen, where in Edge, which looks at whether an application, a website is trusted?
Yeah.
The ISG will allow you to. It gives an application a green light. Essentially, it says this app is trusted. It doesn't say these apps aren't trusted. It doesn't explicitly say X, Y, and Z aren't trusted. It just says which ones are. So it gathers that information from the insights that Microsoft have got across the broad spread of Windows 10 and Windows 11 devices in the world. And if an application is widely adopted and not triggering antivirus, not triggering anti-malware flags, then it's trusted. That's essentially it. And those applications can run. And that is the concept you would use in a lightly managed environment to give a good base layer of protection.
So these are going to be feeds that Microsoft have collected from various sources that go into this kind of security graph, intelligent security graph, to give those signals. So I've seen something when doing things like a cloud app security, like a discovery of what cloud apps are being used, across various sources. That kind of brings in where you've got all the relevant detail of a particular application, who it's made by, the versions. It's got a whole plethora. Is that the same thing as the ISG, or?
It's using the same insights. It's using all of the cloud intelligence that Microsoft have gathered about every endpoint that's using Windows 10 and Windows 11. It's not possible to not opt in to sending these insights as a home user. So they have billions of data points about whether applications are widespread or not. Same with websites. And that's the information it's using to essentially drive this platform. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's cool. Pretty cool.
Right. So I have bored you with slides, so apologies for that.
Not at all.
I am gonna jump back to a quick demo, if that's all right. I just want to show you how simple it can be to deploy a WDAC policy via Intune.
Cool.
So this will hopefully just take a moment. In the Endpoint Manager Admin Center, as I'm in now, I've just gone from the home blade to devices. And then in devices, you can either get to it by, there's a couple of ways you can get to it, annoyingly. And unfortunately, it's not exactly the same. I'll show you the first way. If we go to configuration profiles and then choose create profile, we get to choose Windows 10, and then we're going to look at a template, and the template is endpoint protection.
Okay.
We choose that, and we'll call this WDAC demo. And here's the endpoint protection categories that we can choose from. You can see we've got Defender Application Guard here. You'll also see that it's called Microsoft Defender Application Guard because Microsoft cannot decide what this platform is called. They have no consistency throughout. It's been written by different people, and the wording is just different throughout this whole thing.
Cool.
So, sorry, Application Guard. I meant to click Control. My bad.
Control, yeah.
Sorry, yeah. So WDAC here, MDAC here.
Learn more.
Learn more about WDAC. Here's MDAC. Consistency is absolutely awful. And then if you read this, application control integrity policies, and the tooltip is choose the integrity policies for your users' devices. And we've got the option of enforce or audit. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So if we choose enforce, we get this ISG, trust apps with good reputation, enable or not. And then it helpfully tells you dynamically what that means. So only Windows components, Microsoft Store apps, reputable apps trusted by the ISG will be allowed to run. And obviously, if you choose not configure, then only Windows and Store apps will be allowed to run. And if I was to choose next, we're in the assignment piece. That is configuring Defender App Control. It is incredibly simple. The other method of deploying it would be an endpoint security. And we go into endpoint security and then over to attack surface reduction, and we can create an attack surface reduction rule. So let's look at Windows 10 and later, and then we've got attack application control, and then if we create this policy, this is again where the terminology and the wording just falls down again, because if we choose next, and then we've got Microsoft Defender application control, App Locker application control, and then the tooltip is App Locker application. It's like they wrote it in a hurry.
Yeah.
And then you've got enforce component and store apps, audit component and store apps, enforce component, store apps, and Smart Locker. Where'd Smart Locker come from? What's that?
Yeah, okay.
When did that appear? Well, Smart Locker is the ISG, but someone decided they were going to call it Smart Locker when they were writing this interface.
Cool.
Block users from ignoring smart screen warnings. So it uses smart screen to say, actually, this app isn't trusted. And that's the Smart Locker concept. So it's possible to allow a user to override that technically. So if we look at this, let me just refresh my memory. By setting this to yes, Smart Screen will not present an option for the user to disregard the warning and run the app. The warning will be presented, but they won't. Yeah. So we can enable this to prevent users from ignoring the Smart Screen warning, like it said. And then this one here is a fun option: yes or not configured. Turn on Smart Screen, yes, or don't. And the funny thing about this Smart Screen option is that setting it to yes will enforce the use of Smart Screen for all users. Setting it to not configured returns it to the default, which is for it to be on anyway. So it doesn't
matter.
Yeah. they've really not put a lot of effort into this particular
I suppose
screen.
go back to that tooltip. Did it say that you can kind of point things to custom URLs?
You can, sorry, no, it says URI.
URIs.
You can disable it using a custom policy if you need to disable Smart Screen for whatever reason.
Right.
So this you would be forgiven if you'd configured this to not configured and said to your organization and your boss, I've not turned on Windows Smart Screen, when in fact you haven't done anything at all.
You haven't turned
and
it
it is
off.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's that. And then again, we're at the deployment stage, right? So this again is the limit of the configuration that you can do when you're deploying it. So that's kind of it. There is much more I want to talk about, especially with the creating custom policies. There's a fantastic website that you can use, the WDAC Wizard, which lets you download a Wizard application, which looks a little bit, it's updating, which essentially is a Wizard application which will create the policy for you, so you can use ticky boxes to choose certain things. And that's a fantastic way to create your custom policy and deploy it. But honestly, if you do want to learn more about Microsoft Defender Application Control or Windows Defender App Control or whatever, there is a fantastic series on YouTube by Matthias Melkerson on the Mem Tips and Tricks channel. Hopefully you can put the description in, the link in the description, because it's a 4-part series and it is utterly incredible, with the fantastic Kay Moppelfans from I forget the organization, OSCC, I think. And they're security organization now.
I'll put it in the description, obviously, for people to get hold of. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and that will take everything I've said and throw it out the window and tell you how it really works. But essentially, the point I was hoping you'd get out of this, John, is that it's really easy to turn this on at a base level, and why not, right?
Yeah, I can see that. Absolutely. Like you say, so you're basically, using Intune in this instance, you're creating effectively a profile that will be deployed to whatever scoped devices you want it to be. Like you say, why wouldn't you just do this basic configuration for the level of security benefit that it can give you straight out of the box?
And as if you watch that course by Kim and Matthias, they explain the majority of the reasons that an organization would give for why not, as you just said, why wouldn't you do that, is because it's too complicated. We've got some development users who wouldn't be able to do this. Well, leave them to be unprotected. You've got probably 90% of your organization who would benefit massively. Your receptionists, your standard users doing standard workflows and standard tasks, they could be instantly protected from malware broadly across the organization, and you've reduced your attack surface massively by deploying this one policy to the easy users.
Yeah, and I suppose it's going back to the start of this video. This is just one element we're focusing on here today, and like you say, that the point you've kind of driven down is described it quite well, in the sense that, look, there are a number of seemingly overlapping products. And I think that's potentially something that kind of hinders people from jumping in and getting things up and running. Like you say, it borders with that complexity issue, where when you've got a number of different products and you can't quite see where one ends and one starts, it's easy to go, I'll just leave that be. But no, that makes sense. So effectively, next, and you've deployed that now to a whole bunch of devices at a base, and that would have been just the first. Like you say, this is a single policy through Intune, so it's not that multi-policy capability. But if you were doing it through Config Manager or scripts or whatever it is, then you get the ability to build up those policies, like you said earlier.
Yeah, if you use the WDAC Wizard that I mentioned, you've got the concept of single policy format or multiple policy format, and it really is very simple to create. I'm not going to create one now because it'll take a little while, but if I choose base policy and then next, you get those 3 options. So default, just Windows components, trusted Microsoft stuff, or signed and reputable by the ISG. And then you've got this ticky box exercise to go through and choose what you want. You've got that full customization of these policies, so you can make it do whatever you need to do.
And I suppose for maybe some admins or users that are coming across this for the first time, it's really understanding what each of those checkboxes is actually doing to your system, so that you know you're being protected for the things you want to be protected by, and obviously you're not kind of making productivity a really difficult thing for your particular needs, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just as a word of caution, always, it by default it is anyway, but always push a policy in audit mode first, and then check through the event logs to see which applications are being blocked. That's the concept that we work with, where we test it out first rather than enforcing it, because you don't want to push a policy that will block applications running in your organization without giving it a good test first to make sure that all the applications that should run do run. And Kim goes through an awesome explanation of how you can make this even better using certificates and signing packages of applications, so that you don't need to go through this policy creation thing at all.
Awesome stuff. So are we at the end of the road there, Dean, for Windows
I think so. I mean, this
application control?
I think we are. I think hopefully I've just whet your appetite with it though, and you'll go away and learn much more about it, because it is absolutely fantastic, and I think it's the most underused and both underused and easiest to deploy security capability within Windows, from what I'm aware of.
So is there any talk or have you got any idea of what further developments there may be around this space? You know, obviously, as you pointed out earlier, this is just for Windows OS. Is there any concept of anything going on around that for protecting Mac or any other OSs in that regard that you're aware of?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of development that I'm aware of already, and Kim talks about that and talks about a lot of development in his video as well, where there's a lot going on. A lot of it can't be discussed in public. There's a lot of stuff in private preview right now, for example, but a lot of development around how you can manage these moving forward with that, with signing packages and stuff, because that currently isn't natively supported within Intune. It is still using the native single policy mode, and surely that's got to change.
No, good stuff. Cool. Well, thank you so much for giving up your time, Mr. Ellerby. It's been splendid. My first dip into Windows Defender application control, so at least I know a little bit more now. I can be even more dangerous now, Dean. What have you done?
Indeed. But you can protect organizations, so we're all good.
Absolutely. But no, that leaves me nothing more to say, but thanks for coming and schooling me in this particular technology, Dean. It's been great.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Anytime. Catch you very soon.
Bye.
Bye for now.